Welcome back. In light of Macon's bicentennial, Fort Hawkins is reopening its doors to visitors.
The historic site in East Macon is giving a re-education of its history in a unique way. 41 NBC's Brick Nelson has more.
For some Macon historians, you can't tell the history of Macon without mentioning Fort Hawkins, the birthplace of Macon. Now the historic board of Fort Hawkins is making that possible with just a click of a button.
On this episode of Middle Georgia Podcast, we begin a 4-part series about historic Fort Hawkins.
The original fort was built between 1806 and 1810 and has been a part of Macon's history from relations with the Muskogee Indians to the War of 1812. Fort-Hawkins-Foundation board member Sandra Darby says it has become one of the city's historic hidden gems.
A lot of people don't know about Fort Hawkins, and we want to educate the children about Fort Hawkins because there's so much history here, and it is the birthplace of Macon.
The fort is preparing to reopen after being closed for about 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. The foundation came up with the unique idea to run a podcast to educate residents about the fort's history.
It's very important to the history and what was going on, not only in this part of the country, but in the United States itself back then.
Owner of Middle Georgia Podcast, Ben-Sandifer, says he was eager to start the project and re-educate residents about the fort's forgotten history.
It gets kind of lost with all the other historic sites and attractions there are to see in Macon, and nothing against any of them. They're all wonderful, but Fort Hawkins belongs right there on the list with all the others.
The podcast will include interviews with Colonel Benjamin Hawkins himself.
Now, I've portrayed many historical characters over the years. This was an awesome character to try to portray and share.
Marty-Willet is the former chairman of the Fort Hawkins Commission and Colonel Hawkins' interpreter. He says teaching the fort's history during the macon-bibb-bicentennial is more important than ever. In Macon, Brick Nelson, 41 NBC News.
Grand reopening of Fort Hawkins will be on Saturday, March 25th.
And to listen to the podcast, you can head on over to our website, 41NBC.com.